For years, I've been rushed around, taking whatever I fancied, not giving a tinker's curse for those I hurt. Yet here I am, with riches and reputation, feeling no wiser than when I left home. Yet when I turn around and look at the course I've run, there's not a man or woman that I love left standing beside me. Edward Kenway, 1721. Hello and welcome to Visions of the Past. My name is Andrew, and I'm the host of this Assassin's Creed lore podcast. This is episode 57, and today we're going to take a look at the final years of the pirate-turned-assassin, Edward Kenway. We've discussed Edward's earlier years in episode 53, but in this episode, we'll pick up where we left off and talk about the final evolution of his character. Before we get started with the details of the rest of Edward's life, I want to again thank Jacko1893 on Instagram for the suggestion of looking into Edward's life. I also want to talk about the etymology of Edward's name. Edward is derived from Old English, meaning rich guard. James is derived from the Hebrew name Jacob, meaning supplanter. Kenway is a given name of also Old English origin, meaning brave or loyal fighter. As a family name, though, it comes from the village of Kenway in Fife, Scotland, which derives from Scottish Gaelic. Now that we've spoken about his name, let's take a look at the rest of Edward Kenway's life. In January of 1718, Edward was back in Nassau and heard of a general pardon for all pirates that was issued by Woodes Rogers, who now was the governor of the Bahamas. After a disagreement on how to handle the situation with Benjamin Hornigold, Edward and Edward Thatch decided to search for medicine for Nassau within the shipwreck of the same Spanish treasure fleet that Edward got the jackdaw from. After finding that the medicine was spoiled, Thatch took his ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, and attacked the British man-of-war, looking for medicine. Edward ended up saving him from the trouble that Thatch ended up in, and the two found that the medicine on board was made in Charlestown, and the two decided to travel there and retrieve all the medicine that they had. On May 28th, Edward found Thatch was sitting offshore with hostages, waiting for the delivery of medicine, leading Edward to take the jackdaw up the harbor and snuck ashore to obtain the medicine. Returning to the Queen Anne's Revenge, with 2 crates and the means to make more, not only was Edward congratulated by Thatch, he was told that Thatch planned to retire while he still had time to enjoy it. When Edward returned to Nassau, and while he was there on July 22nd, Nassau was blockaded by the Royal Navy. Woodes Rogers came ashore with Commodore Peter Chamberlain and publicly announced the general pardon that was being offered to the pirates, and that taking it or not, no one was going to leave the island. Benjamin Hornigold ended up taking the pardon from Rogers, while Charles Vane and Edward plotted to break the blockade. After finding gunpowder to convert a ship into a fire ship, Edward and Vane overheard that the Commodore planned to ignore Rogers' orders and destroy the pirate ships that night. This led Edward to make his way to the Commodore's ship and assassinate him. The pirates then made their move, sending the fire ship at the British fleet and escaping the area, setting course for Edward's hideout in Great Anagua. Vane and Edward met with Edward Thatch on November 22, 1718, with the intention to bring him back to the West Indies. After talking to Thatch, Edward not only saw that Thatch was happy in retirement, but also learned of a man named Roberts that worked on a slave ship called the Princess. That night, Edward followed a local that was acting strangely. Eventually, Edward overheard a conversation with the man and a British officer that ended up with the launch of a flare that signaled the British fleet to Babam Okarok. Edward then rushed to the jackdaw, meeting with Thatch in an attempt to escape. The two did end up disabling and boarding a man-of-war, but it wasn't long before they were overwhelmed. Thatch was quickly surrounded and killed, while Edward was thrown overboard. Shaken, Edward made his way back to the jackdaw and escaped to Great Anagua, and informed Vane of Thatch's death, and the pair started making plans to go after the princess. Deciding the best route to finding the princess was to get information from another ship of the Royal African Company, they set out to find one. The two eventually scuttled the Royal African Pearl and found that the princess sails every few weeks from Kingston. Unfortunately for Edward and Vane, Jack Rackham led a mutiny that left Edward and Vane stranded on the island of Isla Provincia and intended to sell Adewale back into slavery. By February 1719, Vane blamed Edward for the misfortune and threatened to kill him. Chasing Vane through the jungle, Edward eventually managed to disarm Vane, who happened on a stash of muskets and grenades, and then left him on the island after seeing a ship arrive. After arriving back to Great Inagua, Edward found that Adewale and Mary Read had retaken the Jackdaw from Rackham after he took Governor Rogers' pardon. Still stuck on filing Bartholomew Roberts and the observatory, Edward sailed to Kingston in search of the princess. Eventually, Edward came across Templars Woodes Rogers, Laureano Torres, and Benjamin Hornigold, and listened to their conversation, learning that Hornigold sent one of his ships to Principe, where Roberts was last seen. After Hornigold saw the Jackdaw in port, he called out Edward, and a fight ensued with some of Torres's guards. Edward ended up escaping to the Jackdaw and set a course for Principe. On June 19, 1719, the Jackdaw arrived at Principe to find the crew of the Princess was either dead or captured by Templars Josiah Burgess and John Cockram. As Edward searched the remains of the Princess's camp, he found Bartholomew Roberts. The two eventually made a deal where Edward would kill Burgess and Cockram and free the crew of the Princess, and Roberts would lead him to the observatory. Edward agreed and set out to complete his end of the bargain. After killing Burgess and Cockram, Roberts told Edward to meet him on Mysteriosia in a few months. In September, Edward met Rogers there, who told Edward that he needed to take something from the Portuguese. After equipping the Jackdaw with a Portuguese flag, they managed to get close enough to ambush the Nosso Senhor da Compressão. Here, they found what they were looking for, and after the ambush, Roberts took the ship, renaming it the Royal Fortune, and arranged to meet Edward off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. When the pair met again, Roberts noticed that Edward was followed by Benjamin Hornigold, leading to Edward giving him chase and forcing him to beach his ship. Edward then chased Hornigold, eventually assassinating him. Returning to Roberts at Long Bay, Edward then traveled inward to the observatory, clearing the native guardians for Roberts to follow. At the gate to the observatory, Roberts killed his crew that carried the crystalline cubes that held Templar blood, stating that they would not be able to handle what was inside, but that Edward was made of sterner stuff. While Edward carried the crate of cubes to the observatory, Roberts told Edward its true nature. But to truly explain it, he placed the cube inside what looked like a crystal skull. This caused the armillary sphere that the skull was in to spin and project an image of Mary Read trying to recruit Anne Bonny into the life of piracy. After seeing another image from a different cube, Edward understood what the Templars' interest in the observatory really was, but after excitingly claiming that with the skull he and Roberts could be masters of the ocean, Roberts knocked him off the platform and left him in the observatory. After escaping, Edward was injured, sliding down a steep slope, but continued to try and reach Roberts. An amused Roberts told Edward that the Jackdaw was gone, and that he decided to take advantage of the large bounty on his head. In November 1720, Edward was riding away in Fort Charles in Port Royal, Jamaica. When Anne Bonny and Mary Read were sentenced to death, Edward was present and was approached by Woodes Rogers and Laureano Torres, who offered to free him in exchange for the location of the observatory. Edward refused, and for the next 4 months spent his time in the prison. One night he was hung in a gibbet where he was freed by Atabai, who was there to free Anne and Mary. Edward helped Atabai after being offered safe passage from the prison, eventually making it inside the prison where they found Mary gravely ill after the birth of her child, and Anne started to give birth herself. As Atabai helped Anne out, Edward carried Mary towards freedom. Mary, though, was too weak and ended up dying before they could escape, asking that Edward make amends for his past and to change the course of his life. Edward ended up carrying her body to Atabai, who gave him back his robes, though he still thought that Edward had not earned them, even if they did suit him. Edward spent the next handful of days drinking heavily and hallucinating. Eventually, he did wake up near the docks of Kingston, where he found Adewale standing over him, returning the Jackdaw, resigning as quartermaster, and urged him to travel to Tulum to understand why he resigned. Arriving in May 1721, Edward found that Adewale left to pursue a course that he felt was more honorable. Edward understood, telling him that even though he was wealthy, he lost everyone he cared about. Edward then asked Atabai to help him make amends for his past, and after the two spoke about the Assassin Brotherhood, Tulum was attacked by Spanish Templars. Atabai handed Edward a set of rope darts, and the two set out to clear the jungle of the Spanish, leading Edward to sneak onto their ship and assassinate the captain. After the attack, Edward, Adewale, and Atabai discussed their next move, the removal of Woodes Rogers, Bartholomew Roberts, and Laureano Torres. After choosing a course of action, Edward spoke to Anne about their losses, eventually leading to her taking the position of quartermaster on the Jackdaw. Edward then headed to Kingston in search for Governor Rogers. Meeting with the Assassin Bureau leader Anto, who Edward helped assassinate Kenneth Abraham in 1716, a plan was hatched where Edward would assassinate Rogers at his own party. After Edward infiltrated the party, he struck from a bench, and before he left, found that Roberts was back in Principe. On February 10th, 1722, Edward arrived to Principe to find that Roberts had taken the stronghold where Edward had killed Burgess and Cockram as his own. After infiltrating the stronghold, Roberts ran aboard the Royal Fortune. Giving chase on the Jackdaw, Edward eventually disabled the ship and boarded it. After besting Roberts, Edward agreed to destroy Roberts' body so the Templars could not recover it. After recovering the crystal skull from Roberts, Edward headed to Havana in search of Torres. Arriving in August, Edward met with the Havana bureau leader, Rana Dinsmore, who he helped assassinate Hilary Flint in 1717, to have her guard the skull as he hunted Torres. Trailing El Tiburon, Torres' personal guard, to the Castello, Edward assassinated a man dressed as a decoy. After killing the decoy, Edward then battled and killed El Tiburon himself. After reporting to Rana, Edward realized that Torres was en route to the observatory. Arriving on the 1st of September, Edward made his way to the center of the observatory, leaving Anne outside to guard the entrance. After making it past the observatory's defenses, Edward assassinated Torres. When Edward made it back to the central platform, he found that Adewale, Anne, and Atabai had entered with the crystal skull. When the skull was placed back within the Almery sphere, the defenses turned off, and Atabai suggested that Edward hunt the cubes of blood that the Templars had taken from the observatory. Edward agreed to this, but said that he had to mend things with his wife Caroline first. Atabai then handed him a letter that had arrived the week before that stated that Caroline had died from smallpox and that Edward had a daughter named Jennifer. Before Edward sailed for England, though, he and Adewale sailed to recover the lost gold of the Palvora. When Edward was underwater, the Jackdaw was captured by Edward Lowe. This led Edward to trap the diving bell with explosives, along with the gold he found, and once it was back on the ship, it exploded. Using this distraction, Edward snuck on board, released his men, and after clearing the Jackdaw, left Lowe on his own ship after disabling it with a well-placed rifle shot, setting off barrels of gunpowder on the deck of Lowe's ship. By October, Edward had arranged for Jennifer to arrive to Great Inagua and gifted the island to the assassins as a base of operations. Adewale also informed him that Rogers survived and was in England, broke, but still a threat. After vowing to deal with Rogers when he could, Edward asked Anne to return to London with him, an offer she refused, claiming it was the wrong place for an Irish woman, though believing she also didn't have the conviction to become an assassin. Sometime after Jennifer arrived, Edward sailed the Jackdaw back to England, finding his mother working in the old shillelagh. After telling her of his intent to track down and kill those responsible for the attack on her farm, she disowned him. He then met with Rose to find the people who were responsible. Rose was eventually used as a hostage against Edward, and after an exchange between Edward and Emmett Scott over the responsibility of Caroline's death, Edward shot him in the head and then fatally wounded his guard Wilson with a throwing knife. Edward then turned his attention to Matthew Haig, but before he could finish him, he was confronted by Matthew's father Aubrey and Robert Walpole. Walpole offered Edward a pardon for his life as a pirate, insisting that it was out of gratitude for killing his cousin Duncan, who brought dishonor to their family. Walpole also dissuaded Edward from killing Matthew and from hunting Woodes Rogers. The latter he assured was no longer a Templar and was locked in a debtor's prison. After receiving his pardon, Edward moved to London and joined the British Brotherhood of Assassins, eventually gaining the rank of Master. While there, he met and married Tessa Stephenson Oakley, and using her family's connections, bought a manor on Queen Anne Square, and by 1725, the pair had a son they named Haytham. Edward eventually became the co-leader of the British assassins, with a master named Miko. Bringing stability to the British Brotherhood, Edward was able to make connections all throughout London, and was able to keep the Templars at bay in England. Edward was also able to build a commercial enterprise that he used as a cover to travel the world in search of Isu sites, like the observatory. He discovered temples in Italy and Alamut, and tried to find the location of the Grand Temple, writing of it within his personal journal. One of his most important discoveries, though, he kept closely guarded. During one of his travels, he came across the Shroud of Eden that could heal any injury. Deciding to keep it a secret, he locked the shroud away in a box made by the Isu, and that could only be opened with a key of the same design. He then hid the box in the Tower of London, alongside the British crown jewels, and hid the key atop the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral. Edward also trained Haytham in swordsmanship and other forms of combat, starting at the age of 6, and encouraged him to think for himself, despite others' opinions. On December 4th, 1733, Edward and his family were accosted by a mugger after seeing the Beggar's Opera at the Theatre Royal. Edward was able to stop the mugger, but his property manager, Reginald Birch, jumped on him, wanting to kill him for what he had done. Edward refused, and was upset at Birch's harsh response. Later that night, Edward asked Haytham if he thought the thief should go free, which Haytham eventually agreed, and was presented with a steel short sword as a gift for his 8th birthday. Eventually, Edward found out that Birch was a Templar, causing a large argument that ended with Birch storming out of Edward's office. On December 3rd, 1735, the Kenway home was infiltrated by masked men who kidnapped Jennifer and killed several servants. After making sure his son and wife were safe, Edward confronted 2 of the intruders, and after a prolonged fight, Edward was stabbed in the chest with his sword, dying instantly at the age of 42. Edward is one of my favorite characters, not just because he's a pirate that didn't care for authority, but because he evolved as a character. Him going from caring for little more than gold and a comfortable life, to believing into a cause that he ended up dedicating his life to, is what draws me to him as a character. He goes from knowing the most notorious pirates of the golden age of pirates and spending his time pirating with them, to being a merchant searching the world for ancient artifacts. There are a few characters within the series that sees this kind of evolution. His character arc within Black Flag is one of the reasons it's been in the top 3 of my favorite Assassin's Creed games since its release in 2013. Thank you for joining me today. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday for new episodes. If you love Visions of the Past, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on Apple Podcasts. If you have any questions about Assassin's Creed or topics that you'd like me to cover, please feel free to hit me up on Twitter and Instagram at visions_AC, and you can find those links in the show notes below. Until next time, my assassin friends, make sure to follow the creed, and to those Templars listening, may the Father of Understanding guide you.